We will now begin with item number 5, Oswald Coastal Appeal. If you wish to speak on item 5, please call in on 619-343-2539. The conference ID is 514-103-577 #. We will begin with the staff's presentation.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Mike Johnson with Planning and Development Services. Today, I will present Item 5, the Oswald Coastal Administrative Appeal. The Department is before you today recommending denial of the appeal and upholding the determination of Planning and Development Services that a coastal permit is required. The project site, identified by the red star, is located within the San Diego Community Plan and the County of San Diego Local Coastal Plan. The site contains an existing driveway, residence, and landscaping. Residential uses, undeveloped land, and Stonebridge Court surround the subject property. As shown on the right, the San Alejo Lagoon is located to the west and southwest. The project includes an appeal of the Director's determination that a coastal permit is required for a proposed 2-story, approximately 3,000 square foot detached structure consisting of an accessory dwelling unit, or ADU, garage, roof deck, and storage basement. The project site would also involve an extension of a driveway to serve the structure. The site is subject to several county and coastal commission approvals. In 1997, the Coastal Commission issued a coastal permit for the existing house. In February 2021, the County of San Diego's Local Coastal Program, or LCP, was certified by the Coastal Commission, granting the county permitting authority within the unincorporated coastal area. With an LCP, the county is now in charge of issuing coastal permits within the unincorporated county. The project site is within the county LCP and therefore subject to its regulations. In November of 2024, after meeting with the applicant and Coastal Commission several times, PDS issued a letter to the applicant explaining that a coastal permit is required. In December of 2024, the owner appealed this determination. The applicant submitted a total of 8 documents with their appeal, which consisted of correspondence the applicant had with the Coastal Commission, a draft Coastal Commission memo, a summary of their research, plans, and photographs. The appeal states that a coastal permit should not be required for the proposed ADU. PDS reviewed this information with the assistance from the Coastal Commission and conducted a site visit. Based on our research, it was determined that a coastal permit is required as discussed in the following slides. Based on the county LCP, development within the coastal zone requires approval of a coastal permit, unless the project qualifies for an exemption. PDS reviewed the exemptions within our plan, which include exemptions for repair and maintenance, minor improvements to existing houses, and minor excavations. Unfortunately, this project does not qualify for any of the exemptions. The property also falls within an area of the plan that is designated as a viewshed and an environmentally sensitive habitat area, which further reduce exemptions that apply to the property. Since an exemption is not consistent with our LCP, granting the appeal could reasonably and likely result in the Coastal Commission potentially revoking the county's LCP and removing the ability of the county to process coastal permits. PDS also contacted the Coastal Commission to determine if they were aware of any exemptions for the ADU and if the original coastal permit allowed for an ADU. We were informed that detached ADUs are not exempt from coastal permit requirements and they must comply with the county LCP. In addition, the original coastal permit required a subsequent coastal permit for any new structure. Based on staff's analysis, granting the appeal could reasonably and likely result in the Coastal Commission potentially revoking the county's LCP and removing the ability of the county to process coastal permits. Because of this, and for the reasons mentioned in the previous slides, staff recommends that the Planning Commission deny the appeal and uphold the director's determination that a coastal permit is required. Thank you. This concludes our presentation, and we are available for questions.
Any comments or questions from the commission? Madam Secretary, are there any planning or sponsor groups wishing to speak?
Sean, do we have anyone on hold from a CPD or CSG?
No, we have no callers for this item.
We will now take public testimony. Madam Secretary, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, we do. We do have one member. When your name is called, please come forward and stand near the lectern. As soon as the person before you is finished, or one person, please approach the lectern and state your name for the record and begin your comments. Mr. Stephen Mott.
Hi, I'm Steve Mott. I'm here as a family friend of Abe Oswald. He is currently in India. He's a distinguished technologist working on some battery technology and couldn't be here today. I wanted to thank Mike Johnson for his support in this process. He called me several times. He tried to explain how this process works. It's a little bit confusing for a layman, and made every effort to be available to me. My friend Abe makes the point that the development is really minimal impact because the lot, did have a coastal committee permit before, and there's very little grading involved. In the presentation, Mike talks about a driveway to the side of the property, which essentially already exists there. It was contemplated that there would be a lower outbuilding on the property at the time of the previous permit in 97. Mike talks about contacting the Coastal Commission for clarity on this issue. And I guess it sort of strikes me as sort of the fox guarding the hen house here. You're going to ask the Coastal Commission whether a coastal permit is needed. I think their answer is always going to be yes, or they're going to at least tend towards that direction. I think Abe's point is that the County Planning Commission fully comprehends all of the environmental and hillside review issues related to this property. Mike Johnson and another planner visited the site. They understand the sensitivities and can adequately protect the environment there. I guess I would just also add that, Abe is, he's 79 years old. He's trying to consolidate his family on this property. He has two adult sons, and I think he's entitled to peaceful enjoyment of his property. And by requiring him to go through the additional expense and delay of getting a coastal permit, I think that really interferes with his peaceful enjoyment of this property. Thanks very much for hearing me. And I do know that Abe is available by remote link. I don't know if he's online now.
I don't see him right now, but I can try to join the call again. Let me check.
Any of the commissioners have any questions for the speaker?
Not for the speaker. Mr. Slovak, put this in real simple terms. The department has decided that the development needs a coastal permit, correct? And that's because of what?
So we have an adopted local coastal plan, which allows us to issue the coastal permit. We have looked at that coastal plan, and this project does not fall under any of the exemptions in that coastal plan. So from that perspective, it does require a permit, and that's the county's decision. We also, on top of that, did reach out to the Coastal Commission to see if there were any other avenues that would exempt this from a permit. And they kind of agreed with our conclusion that it does require a coastal permit, but it would be something that the county would issue, not the Coastal Commission.
Well, if you ask them, of course, they're going to say it requires a permit. And it also delays the processing of something as simple as this
I'd
for
like to-
over a year.
I thought I thought you could do an ADA by right, everywhere else, right, except the Coastal Commission? Is that right?
Commissioner, hi, I'm Jared Markey with the County Counsel's Office. We did look at that, and it's true that you can do an ADU by right almost everywhere in the unincorporated county except in the coastal zone, where a detached ADU still requires a coastal permit, and that's because of the way that the ADU law was written. So I think Mr. Abe's
With all due respect to the Coastal Commission, to hell with them. I think that, you know what, let them buck everything up the state because we're doing these ADAs. This happens to be in the Rancho Santa Fe area. We don't have a lot of ADAs up there because the people don't particularly want to do it. They like their large lots. And I, for one, Director, no offense to you, but I'm going to vote with the applicant because you know what, you know what, if they want to do this and horse around this fellow and everything else over an ADU when we're told to put those everywhere else in the state by right, boy, I tell you what, that dog doesn't hunt.
My concern, Mr. Slovak, is this. I join in Commissioner Barnhart's comments. I think that it's about the most useless organization other than the California State Bar that's ever been in existence. But I'm concerned that if we hold for you, the project's gonna be stopped when somebody appeals it to them and claims you have to have the permit, and they say, yeah, you do.
Sure. Okay, thank you. You know, he has the support of his neighbors, immediate neighbors on this project. He has the support of his local, whatever you call them, the homeowners association, which is extremely strict. You know, they nitpick everything in that development, and yet they're in support of this project. So again, with all due respect to the county planning, I think they fully comprehend the environmental protection needed for this site, and they'll do a good job under the normal county permitting process. But asking the Coastal Commission to weigh in on this topic, again, as you said, they're just inclined to say, well, of course it needs a permit, right? So I asked you to use your good judgment and use your discretion here, and you know, kind of support Mr. Oswald in the development of this property. Thank you.
Commission, if it's all right, did want to share some context. So prior to us having a coastal plan where the county can process these permits, property owners would have gone through the Coastal Commission to get the permits prior to us being able to issue a permit. So even with an accessory dwelling unit being a ministerial permit, we still would have waited for the approvals from outside agencies. If we violate our local coastal plan, we are in jeopardy of risking continuing with our local coastal plan and being able to issue the permits at the county, and then applicants would go back to the Coastal Commission for permits before we could issue locally. I'll pause if council wants to nuance that in any way.
This is exactly what's going on in this country. That you got bureaucrats that are now deciding what is law and what is not law instead of people that vote and all that other sort of stuff. And I understand everything you're saying. I am fundamentally opposed to this. It is petty, and I just am not going to stand for it. I may be overvoted by the other commissioners, and that's fine. I've been overvoted many times. But you know what? You got to push back on this kind of nonsense.
Commissioner, with great respect, the issue here is whether or not you have the legal authority to grant this exemption. And the way that the law is written, the ADU law carves out an exception to that by right process for detached ADUs in the coastal zone. And so the normal streamlined process just doesn't apply to this project, and it still will require a coastal.
With all due respect, Counselor, you have a requirement in the state of California that any place in this state that you want to put an ADU in, you got a by right deal. And so here you have a coastal commission that says that applies to everybody in the state but us.
My only quibble with that statement, sir, is that it's the state assembly, not the coastal commission, that made that decision. It's in the statute itself.
Well, I think that's a very narrow interpretation.
I do have a question.
Commissioner Calvo?
Yes, so let's just say we approve the appeal, and then the applicant then goes through the county, but then you would have to deny it because it's violating the law?
We'll stand by the commission, decision that the planning commission makes. The planning commission has the authority to decide this appeal. But if the planning commission acts contrary to the law, which, because we looked at it first and said, there's just no way we don't see any way to do this. And so we said, well, let's explore all the possibilities. And so we went to the coastal commission and said, hey, do you see any way that we could get this done? And they didn't see any way either. So we made the initial denial. If the planning commission votes to approve the appeal, then we would stand behind and we would defend that decision. But there's a provision, again, in the Coastal Act that directs the coastal commission, if a local government acts contrary to the LCP, then the coastal commission has the authority to refer that to the state assembly for further action, and the state assembly can then remove or have us start over again on our LCP. And if that happens during the interim while we're developing a new LCP, applicants would have to go directly to the coastal commission. So if the ultimate risk here is that it will reduce a local authority over coastal projects.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask counsel, just to clarify, is there any risk of private litigation if we were to issue the building permit based on the council's decision?
Yes, there is risk of private litigation, and I think, again, under the law, it's clear that we don't have the authority to grant the exemption, and so I think that there's a high risk, were there to be litigation, that we might lose that case, in which case we'd have to pay attorney's fees for the prevailing party.
So
But doesn't the developer have the risk of that lawsuit? Because they defend them, we don't.
That's right, through the indemnity clause.
So it's on his nickel anyway, right? So I don't see that that's a point.
I would like to ask counsel if we could clarify if that indemnification extends to ministerial building permits, which this would be without the coastal permit?
Yeah, there's some nuance there, and I can't guarantee that the indemnification clause would hold.
Could I ask Mike Johnson to weigh in on this in terms of what additional guidance, clarification, or requirement would be provided over what your office would be?
If you could direct your questions to the chair.
I'm sorry, Chair, I'm not familiar with this process. This is the first time I've been before you. I would ask that we have Mike Johnson speak to the issue of what additional value is provided by getting a coastal permit. We feel very strongly that the county comprehends the need for protection of the hillside, protection of native species. They've been to the property, and I think they'll do a great job at that. So what I'd like to know is what besides delay and cost, what is it that the Coastal Commission is going to do here for this property that is several miles away from the coast?
Okay, we'll keep that in mind, and we'll see if Mr. Johnson wants to weigh in at the end of our dialogue here. I'm going to take a moment to point out a few of the background facts of this property. This was a major subdivision that was approved in the 90s. And in the approval of that, there was a coastal permit, probably required. So the developer went and got a coastal permit for the entire project from the Coastal Commission. In doing the project, they also dedicated 51 acres of open space on the north side of the project to keep any development away from the Escondido Creek floodplain area. They also created a 100-foot buffer around the perimeter of the property to protect the, and I use my air quotes, the lagoon area, which is actually a salt marsh associated with the two creeks that flow into that area. And so they did their mitigation at that point in time, and it was reviewed by the Coastal Commission and a permit issued. Then there was a subsequent permit issued, and that was in part because the original permit specifically pointed at certain lots that had steeper slopes, erosion potential, and visual consequence. And they said, as those lots come in, they have to get a coastal permit. And so the subject property did that. They came in and got a coastal permit to build the house. And in doing that, they also included a dirt driveway going down to a graded pad. And they mentioned building a gazebo on it. And that was included in their documentation. And that is where I understand they're citing the ADU is on that graded pad. And there's one wing of it because of the shape that the architect took great care and decided that it would be appropriate because it had a little bit of slope to it to put a basement underneath that wing. So there's no grading permit requirement associated with that ADU that I can see based on my experiences. And so as I went through the report, and the staff is very thorough, there's no doubt about it, but there was a couple things I did want to point at. Could you put up the ESHA diagram, the GIS map, environmental sensitive habitat, ESHA? It was part of your staff report. So you'll notice on this diagram, and this is, I just point this out in part just because geographic information systems should all be taken with a grain of salt. Because when they go through and put these blankets on these maps, they're usually looking at Google Earth photos or some other historical photos they have from the area. This one happens to show the residents and the graded pad area, but they put this environmentally sensitive overlay all the way up into the house on the property. So it brings into question the integrity of that particular diagram and the exercise of relying on that to make any type of statement that they're proposing this in an environmentally sensitive area. They provided photographs. It's a grass area that's been graded previously. And so that was one of the things I noticed about it, that you'll notice how it scallops around the edge of the neighboring properties, recreational facilities and pads and other structures that they built, but they didn't take the time to do that on this subject property. Also, there's another diagram which shows the over 25% sloping areas, which interestingly, another GIS map, and part of that shows the 25% slope going up into the main residence. And so all of those, I'm sure the staff takes their time and looks at this very carefully. We don't point at these types of blankets and make decisions from that. Why I mention this is that the original coastal permit for the overall subdivision mentions specifically environmentally sensitive areas, steep slopes, and so I looked at this, and partly I was confused by the preponderance of assembly bills, Senate bills, coastal commission codes, county codes, layer upon layer upon layer. And it was helpful to read the attachment, which is the updates regarding the implementation of the new ADU laws from the Coastal Commission. And they go through and point out things they'd like to accomplish. And they go through and they say that new residential development must be located within, contiguous with, and in close proximity to existing developed areas able to accommodate it, which is what that pad is. And then they go on and they say that these new ADUs will protect coastal resources in a manner required by the Coastal Act. And they're not constructed in locations where they would require the construction of shoreline protection devices in environmentally sensitive habitat areas and wetlands, in areas where the ADU structural stability may be compromised by bluff erosion, flooding, or wave uprush over the structure's lifetime. The only one of these that would come up would be the environmentally sensitive habitat area, which again, this property has a coastal permit that allowed them to grade that pad area. And it's not going to be determined to be environmentally sensitive. And since it's an existing subdivision, I would imagine the fire district has authority to ask property owners to clear 50 feet along the perimeter of the property. I did notice from the Google Earth photographs of the neighborhood that the immediately adjoining neighbor to the west is completely fireproofed his property, and the one beyond that. And so when we get into impacts to sensitive species, we should recognize that they have that authority to make that requirement annually. And so other things that were included in here, and it's why it gets confusing, is there's the local coastal program, there's coastal administrative permits, there's categorical exemption orders, and it just, and on and on and on. But I noticed in the paperwork that the applicant pointed to a de minimis finding, and that's spelled out in this literature from the Coastal Commission. It's a development that has no potential for any individual or cumulative adverse effect on coastal resources, and is consistent with Chapter 3 policies of the Coast Act. It says, such a finding can typically be made when the ADU has been sited, designed, and limited in such a way to ensure that any potential impacts to coastal resources are avoided. And so the coastal resources that they are chasing after are usually next to the ocean. And it was pointed out by the applicant that this site sits approximately 2 miles inland, east of Interstate 5, adjoining the developed neighborhoods of the San Diego area. And it's within a already approved and built out subdivision, which had mitigated for its impacts when it was built out. And then with categorical exemption orders, I was a little bit confused about that, but they said they are prohibited from applying to tide and submerged lands, beaches, lots immediately adjacent to the inland extent of any beach, lots immediately adjacent to mean high tide line of the sea where there is no beach, and public trust lands. And so even the overlay of where the coastal program is, and I realize this was determined by the Coastal Commission, not by the county. county is an innocent bystander in some ways. But they decided to go all the way inland. They proclaimed this to be a lagoon. It's actually more, I think it's been called a salt marsh, which is actually a delta area for the Escondido Creek and the other adjoining creek. And there's a preponderance of evidence that makes this consistent with the coastal permit that was issued for the property. And because it speaks primarily to environmentally sensitive areas, which there isn't any in the proposed construction area. It speaks to landscaping for visual effects, and that permit was actually required to do some sort of landscaping when they did the residence. And I just am confused by the input from the Coastal Commission, and heaven forbid that they actually are making any threats. That part there would be completely inexcusable, and at least from my perspective. Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your very impressive grasp of the issue here and evaluation of the facts. However, I do agree with my illustrious colleague here that we need to move this nonsense along, and I'd like to call for the question at this point.
Is there any other comments? Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to uphold the applicant.
I'll second the motion.
Madam Secretary, we have a motion to approve the appeal filed by the applicant, and a second. Please call the vote.
Commissioners, please vote. Chair Ashman?
Yes.
Commissioner Barnhart?
Yes.
Commissioner Calvo?
Yes, but I'd like to also say the reason that I'm voting yes is in concurrence with the chair, that the accuracy of that map is definitely in question, and for that reason, I would vote yes.
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes.
Commissioner Pallinger?
Yes.
Let the record show that this item passes with a vote of 5 in favor, none opposed, and 1 absent.
We'll now hear the director's report. Director?
Thank you. Planning and Development Services released the draft Socially Equitable Cannabis Program Environmental Impact Report, PEIR, on January 30th for a 60-day public review period. This provides an additional 15 days beyond the standard 45-day review period. The effort was directed by the Board of Supervisors in January of 2021. The PEIR evaluates 5 project alternatives for cannabis cultivation and non-cultivation activities. The PEIR also includes draft amendments to the zoning ordinance and regulatory code. Staff is presently accepting comments through March 31st and has been holding outreach and engagement activities throughout February. Staff will be bringing this item to the Planning Commission as an informational item for discussion later this year, followed by a formal Planning Commission hearing to consider a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. That concludes our update.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, Director. Commissioner Barnhart, you had a comment?
Yes, I turned 78 last December, and I've been married, as many of you know, for 66 years. I've been on this commission for 10 years. Served on a lot of boards, state boards, national boards, private companies, state, and all of these. I've enjoyed my time on the commission. But there is a time to move on. And it is true, as you age, which many of you will find out, your tolerance for a lot of this nonsense, like we just discussed, is not worth the rise in the blood pressure. It's just ridiculous. When I got on the commission, I thought that we were doing good work because I think we were providing housing for the citizens of San Diego. And I would submit to you over the last, particularly 4 years, in my view, there may be disagreement on this, but we have been a dismal failure. We have municipalities in southern Riverside County that are booming. It's making me even more wealthy than I am now because I'm up there building medical facilities, 2 MOBs, a cancer center, surgical center, because as these young families move where they can actually buy a house, guess what? The doctors move too, because the mother is not going to drive to San Diego to get health care for her children. She wants that health care to be probably within 10 minutes of her house. Likewise, all that retail and everything else is going up there. County's losing all of that property tax revenue of property which would be developed down here. And with all due respect to different points of view, we're just on the wrong track. And at my age, my wife, like I said, has put up with this for 66 years for me doing this. So it's my intention to submit my resignation to Supervisor Desmond. And I wish you the best, but my time is more valuable than coming down here and voting or abstaining on cell tires. This isn't why I got on here. And God help the young families that live in this county because they have no place to live. And so I'm going to ride off into the sunset and enjoy the golf courses on the clubs that I belong to and build my medical facilities, hopefully providing medical care for those that need it. So thank you for your staff. Thank you for all your hard work. And thank you, commissioners, for your friendship. And I'm going to get on my horse and ride.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnhart, for your service and for your sharing in your experiences.
Chair, if we could also offer a word of appreciation.
Certainly.
Commissioner Barnhart, on behalf of the department, we'd just like to say thank you for all the time that you've invested in this. I am extremely sorry that you had to spend so many hours listening to me wax on about projects, but we appreciate it. We will really miss you. We wish you all the best. Hope to see you in the future.